Welcome back to another bonus episode of No Talking Points in partnership with Compass Media and Liaison Strategies. With us again today is Principal of Liaison Strategy, David Valentin. David, always great to have you. I'm excited to hear from you. I know you're one of the few people that are actually in the field in the city of Ottawa as we're continuing to cover the mayoral race here in Ottawa. Well, how are things going? What are you seeing?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me back. And it's great to work with Ottawa Compass and iPolitics. And, it's a very interesting race that we're having here in Ottawa. As we're tracking the Toronto race as well. I would say the Ottawa race is much more exciting, really seeing a lot of movement. And, this month, two candidates are tied for second place. We've got Alex Lawson, who has clawed his way up to 26%, and Jeff Leiper, who has unfortunately slid to 25%. So they're tied within the margin of error right now. And of course, in front is Mark Sutcliffe with 36.
Now, you mentioned something to our reporters that I thought was not just witty, but also very accurate. You said losing is the new winning. Can you explain that to our viewers?
For sure. I mean, it's interesting because the mayor's support has fallen. It used to be 38% last month. It's 36% last month. But last month, it was a much narrower race. He was only leading by 5 or 6 points. This month, he's leading by 10 points. So he's actually safer this month than he was the last. Now, do you want to be losing support month to month? Of course not. That's not a good position to be in. But do you want to have the margin no matter what your support number is? Yes, of course. So even though he's lost support, he's winning by more because the margin has increased. And now the question will be, is that something that he can maintain? Or do we continue to see movement from these other candidates that makes the race narrower?
Now, just diving into the mayor's polling numbers for a second. I mean, obviously, it's got to be concerning to continue to go down. Do you think he's seen his floor at this point in time? What are you seeing in the sub numbers that would tell you why the numbers for the mayor continue to erode month after month?
So I think it's important to remember undecided rate was at 37% last month. This month it's at 34%. Some of the movement we're seeing, not all of it, really does have to do with the fact that as the undecided rate drops, the mayor is not receiving an equal share of the undecided vote than he had before. And let me make this so simplistic. So if you're at 36% and the undecided vote is 40%, and then the undecided vote goes to 30%, right, a 10-point drop in undecided, you need to capture 36% of that undecided vote that went away for you to maintain your 36%, right? It has to break at the same rate you already have it for you to tread water and keep the same number. So it's not necessarily that the mayor is losing an absolute number of supporters. It's just that proportional to what he had before, the undecided rate has fallen. Those voters have not broken for him in the same way, in the same percent. And in fact, more of them have broken for the opposition candidates. You add that and some vote shifts, people, trading their support back and forth. And that's how you see that every month his level of support has been dropping. Now, I do want to point out there's some positive numbers in this survey for Mark Sutcliffe, some good news. And that is that his approval rating, his net approval is up. He's still underwater. It's a -6 this month. That's a big improvement on last month where we saw, a negative number in the double digits. And then when we look at the direction of the city, 51% still tell us they think the city is moving in the wrong direction. But the number of people who think it's moving in the right direction has gone up month over month. So there's some positive signals in this data that suggest maybe things are not as bad for Mark Sutcliffe as they were before, even just structurally, as his approval begins to rebound and the direction of the city begins to rebound a bit. And maybe in the next few months, we'll see more of this movement continue in these numbers that might help him out in the overall race with how undecided voters continue to break.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about the direction of the city. Like, it is the mayor that wears the gaffes when somebody at City Hall decides to light all the Canada Day fireworks off downtown without telling people they're going to do it, or when OC Transpo puts an advertisement out saying, hey, bus is going to be late anyways, might as well stay downtown longer. It's the mayor that wears those, so some of it's probably outside of his realm of what he can deal with, right?
Well, yeah, and there's also tons of things that he has nothing to do with that he will show up for and take credit for. So the knife cuts both ways. The bureaucracy and civil servants are going to do what they're going to do. Sometimes it's a good thing and you can go take credit, and sometimes it's not great, but you're the mayor and you have to take the blame.
Yeah. Now, talk to me about the candidates that are moving up in this. Are you seeing, obviously Alex Lawson has been the benefit of newfound support. Is that coming from certain geographical regions predominantly? Is that being driven by certain issues that you can see?
So, originally Alex Lawson's support was quite concentrated in West Ottawa. Now we're seeing a much more balanced level of support, and I would argue much more sustainable level of support for Alex Lawson in a lot of different neighborhoods, including Central Ottawa, where he's doing, I think, surprisingly well, Southern Ottawa and Eastern Ottawa as well. So now he's getting about mid 20s in all four areas. So it's a big departure from what we saw in the early days for him, where all that support was concentrated out west. He's now sort of evenly spread across the city. For Mr. Leeper, it's a lot of support in the downtown core, which makes sense. It's his traditional area. But we are also seeing the rise of Neil Saravanamuthu. And, he's at 11% now, which if you had asked me when we started if he would be at 11, I don't know that I would have thought that would be possible. And, if you were to continue plotting, if you look at the chart right now and you look at the lines, he's on the way up. Mr. Leeper is on the way down. What happens if Mr. Saravanamuthu continues to claw support away from Jeff Leeper? Could he be in third? Anything is possible, I suppose. I think he's been running a pretty steady campaign. And I think also Mr. Leeper, has definitely felt the brunt of some of the attacks from Mark Sutcliffe. And, you've seen the campaign really point out how long he's been at City Hall, trying to sort of blame him from council decisions, even if maybe he didn't vote in the way that council ultimately decided. He would be a dissenting vote in some cases. And of course, you've heard him talk about, Mr. Sutcliffe, that is, about the far left and the far right. Sort of, out of all that is Mr. Saravanamuthu, who's just been climbing month after month. Now, it's 11% in late July. Could someone go from 11% to the mayor's office? I would argue, sure. There's lots of movement, lots of undecided voters. I think one overwhelming thing that we're sort of seeing from these numbers that's been suggested to me is that a lot of people are looking for that change candidate, are looking for a candidate who's not Mark Sutcliffe because they don't like the mayor. And the real question now, I think, is that change vote going to coalesce among any one candidate? And if it does, I think things become a little more dire for Mr. Sutcliffe. If they do not, I think he's going to ride this vote split all the way back to the mayor's office. And we have to sort of remember that even though the race is kind of exciting and people are trading positions, the most likely outcome right now, even with these numbers, is that Mr. Sutcliffe is going to be reelected, right? Unless people are able to continue that momentum and unless people are able to really convince voters from across the ideological spectrum to support them to enact change.
Are you seeing in the secondary vote shifting, are you seeing Mr. Saravanamuthu's rise in support coming predominantly from the undecideds, or is it from Leaper voters that are disenfranchised with some of the attacks that are being hammered on Mr. Leaper?
I think it's both, but I also think maybe it's not even a question of the number of attacks that necessarily are being given on Mr. Leaper. I think that there certainly plays a role in it. But I think it's also, for me, a real question of, is he running the kind of campaign that people want to see? That, is he taking the fight to Mr. Sutcliffe in the way that people would like? Mr. Saravanamuthu is doing a lot better now, mostly because he's resonating in downtown Ottawa and Eastern Ottawa. And then if you look outside of that, he's only at 9% in the West, and in the South, he's only at 1%. Not a lot of people there that have resonated with his campaign so far. Mr. Leeper, on the other hand, you look at sort of where he is strongest. And again, it's Central Ottawa, Western Ottawa, Southern, he's doing pretty well in Southern Ottawa as well, 25% and 18% in the East. But all of those votes that Mr. Saravanamuthu was getting in Central Ottawa, you could make the argument those should be Mr. Leeper's votes, right? Certainly his campaign would say that. So I think they've done a pretty good job of holding on in the South. And the question now is Mr. Saravanamuthu going to go and slice another 10% off there as well? So, some interesting questions to be had. But I think the more restrained approach that we've seen from the Leaper campaign, and, certainly as I've been following the race, we've seen him talk about this, that he wants to run a different kind of campaign, that he wants to be very positive, forward looking. People always tell you that attack ads don't work, but then in research, we find that they're the most effective thing you can do. So I think his campaign has to consider if they're drawing the right contrast, or if, he's sort of being washed out amongst these attacks that are coming from Mr. Lawson and Mr. Saravanamuthu. And, you can think whatever they might want about them, but they've run relatively healthy campaigns, and you've seen them point to FOIs, you've seen them point to platform planks and, all these different things. They really are trying to create interesting things for the media to focus on, even though it's supposed to be the sleepy summer.
Now, well, you mentioned Mr. Lawson in this. Is Mr. Lawson, in having him here, and I should say every candidate, with the exception of the mayors, came in and chatted with us in the podcast. It's been, I think, very revealing for viewers to be able to see who these people really are. I was surprised a little bit with every one of them. Great group of great group of people that have a strong passion for the city. It clearly comes through. But with Mr. Lawson, one of the things that I expected was a little bit more of a dogmatic approach, a little bit more of a right wing approach. And he seemed fairly centrist on a lot of issues. Is he drawing support away from Mr. Leeper as well? Or is it because everybody kind of draws this nexus between Leeper and Sarah Vanamuto? Is Lawson drawing some of that support as well, do you think?
I think he is, especially from people who want to see a sharper campaign against the mayor. And listen, the mayor, for all of his strengths, is in this net negative for approval, right? I think the question really for me, one of them is at least, is this going to be a referendum on the mayor, or is it going to be a referendum on the other candidates? I think the mayor would say, hey, well, let's hold on a second. Let's talk about Alex Lawson and the convoy and all these different things that he wants to bring up and porta potties and so forth and all that kind of stuff. And let's talk about the very long record Jeff Leeper has had in council. He's been here forever. But I think what we're seeing right now is that really a lot of the race is, are you voting for Mark Sutcliffe or are you not? And again, if that not vote coalesces, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. We haven't tested it yet. I think we'll maybe do this in the months to come. But what Leeper voters prioritize? Is it electing Mr. Leeper or stopping Mark Sutcliffe? For some people, not all, stopping him will be the more palatable option. They'll be willing to hold their nose and vote for someone who maybe doesn't even ideologically strike them the right way if it means keeping the mayor from being reelected. That being said, and the opportunity for Sutcliffe campaign is in trying to drive up Mr. Lawson's negatives as fast as possible. Try to cut off that availability of support, point out things that should make him, extremely unpalatable to Leaper voters so that they can't switch to him, right? I think as long as it's a divided field, things are pretty easy for the Sutcliffe campaign. It's really if Mr. Lawson continues this rise that things are going to start to get problematic, because if you look at the charts, and you look at the overall trend, month after month, Lawson has gained. Month after month, Sutcliffe has gone down in terms of the decided and leaning vote. So if that continues, eventually they'll be even Steven, and if it continues even longer, then eventually the way that these lines are shaped, Lawson would be superseding the mayor in the race.
So you do feel that there's a path for multiple candidates to still win this election?
I do, and I think the four that we're testing here today, I think there's a plausible path for all of them to be in the mayor's chair next year. I really do think it's a question now about, what happens next and how do they adjust as we begin the end of the summer campaign, which is August. Things are going to get a lot faster and a lot busier, a lot more chaotic in September, especially once you start to see debates begin to take place, which is going to be an opportunity for people to create not just good points about the future of the city, but, watch for them to clip the video and use it on social media, use it in advertising, use it in their messaging. And I think those visuals are going to be very strong. Who actually looks like a leader, who's actually able to project a vision for the city. And for those who dislike the mayor, who is standing up to the mayor the most?
Now, we talked about, before we started recording, we talked about the Toronto race for a second and the potential impact of a Chris Alexander entering the race. And obviously that would be, I think everybody agrees that would be very bad for Brad Bradford's campaign and very good for Olivia Child's campaign. In Ottawa, I mean, it's the summer doldrums. People are looking at things to talk about, and certainly somebody that always loves to get her name in the media, Lisa McLeod, has started to make phone calls. Does a polarizing figure like Lisa McLeod, how does that affect this race if she was to enter it at this point in time?
Well, the thing about Lisa McLeod is you either love her or you hate her. And for a new subset of people, you might not know who she is just because she's been out of politics for a while. But if you do know who she is, you probably have an opinion. I think the question is, for those who love her, who are they supporting right now, and do they decide to immediately switch? I can see a case being made that Mr. Lawson would suffer the most. I can see a case being made that Mark Sutcliffe would suffer the most. Though I think on balance, he'd probably be the one to gain the most as well, just because the anti-mayoral vote would be split even further. But I do think there's a subset of his supporters that would also prefer Lisa McLeod. So how much he was to lose, I think, would also play a large role. But it'd be another voice in the field. Would she have a credible path to the mayor's chair? Less than 1 in 3 Ottawa voters is undecided. It's all very close. Could she do it? Of course she could. I think it's too early to rule anyone out And I think there's a plausible path for everyone we're seeing in front of us, even people who haven't filed just yet. She would certainly enter with a lot of experience, with a lot of, and I mean this from the perspective of she would have a fundraising list, she would have a volunteer list, she would presumably have a list of supporters, at least for her own area. Would she be able to grow that quickly enough in the rest of the city? Really depends on the team she puts together and sort of what an accelerated path for her would look like. But, for now, I would say she's not in the race. We have a little less to worry about. But if she were to enter, I think it would continue to shake things up. And things have already been getting shaken up month after month after month.
Yeah, it does seem to make sense that Lisa McLeod entering the race would benefit Mark Sutcliffe the most. But I guess that's what your research will find out in the upcoming months if she does decide to enter the fray once again.
That's right. And I do think for some people it will be quite, and there are Sutcliffe voters, I'm sure, who would decide to switch. But I think there's a bigger proportion of other voters, especially for Mr. Lawson, who would decide to switch to Miss McLeod.
Now, one of the things that I know that you did a little bit of research on this month, and we appreciate all the sub research that you're doing to tell us about the Ottawa voter and the issues that are important to the people of Ottawa. I'm seeing big changes in maybe not the top issue. Top issue seems to be affordability. Once again, housing affordability in particular seems to remain fairly consistent, but we did see a spike this month in a couple of the sub issues such as crime, traffic, and then transit actually becoming less of an issue. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about this and explain what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. A big jump for crime, which is now the third most important issue at 15. Traffic all the way up now to 17%. Meanwhile, transit dipping down to 11. So you're seeing a lot less concern about this. Probably some of that has gone into traffic. Maybe some of that has gone into crime as well. And, small increases for inflation. Inflation has been ticking up month after month after month, a bit of a sleeper issue. And homelessness is up as well. So people really feeling like that's more of an issue now than it is before. I think for me, big takeaway is still that there's such a split, especially when you look at the margin of error and you consider that, it's 23, 17, 15, 12, 12, 11. These issues are very tightly together, which sort of tells you that Ottawa residents are complicated people. They've got a lot of different priorities going on. But that crime spike, for me, it will be really interesting to see if that is sustainable next month and if it continues. For a while, we thought traffic and transit would be the big issues of the election, and they were. This drop in the transit number will be interesting to monitor as well. Obviously, the back to work has begun. Maybe some people are now experiencing the transit system again. They're reminding themselves it's not as bad as they thought, or it is as bad as they thought, but hey, it's here, so now they'll have to deal with it. And they've moved on to a different concern. Hard to say specifically, but it'll be very interesting to see if these numbers repeat next month or if we go back to more of a similar trend line than we had before.
And certainly the trend line with crime, as you identified, shot up this month. And probably because of the 3-4 violent crimes that were very public in the market, and you're starting to get more home invasions again. And these things get a lot of attention with the media. But certainly the traffic trend line just seems to continue to be on a trend line that continues to grow as an important issue with people. Do these help or hurt the incumbents when these kind of issues are starting to overtake some of the issues like transit and some of these things?
I think for Mr. Sutcliffe, crime is a much better issue to have to fight on than transit, just because there's no way you can ascribe 100% of the blame to Mr. Sutcliffe on crime, right? There's so many factors, so many things that are configured in that. Whereas transit, you can pretty much give him all the blame right now if you want to. I don't know if that's the fair thing to do, but I can certainly see how people would come to that conclusion. Traffic, again, this is an issue I don't think he wants to campaign on. It's not getting any better. The back to work is making it worse. He's on record in terms of supporting the back to work. So if you want to blame him for that, you have the opportunity to as well. But crime is a much safer issue. We've seen some recent progress on housing affordability that dipped. Maybe that's as a result of that, or maybe it's just natural evolution of these other things getting more attention. But I think, from his perspective, he would much rather deal with crime than he would some of these other issues where at least he can point to different parts of his record and sort of what he's done with Ottawa Police to try to justify that he's taking action on this.
Now, that being said, it does seem like in your research, the Ottawa Police Service is underwater when it comes to favorability, which do you want to talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing there in regards to people's trust in the police service and the direction that they think it needs to go?
Yeah, I mean, listen, broadly speaking, police in Ottawa are unpopular. And I think there's probably some echoes from the convoy that are still beginning to reverberate. And also, we've seen some incidents of Ottawa police lately that have not been inspiring in terms of their professionalism. I think context is always important too, right? And so, like, these Ottawa police numbers in the abstract, well, what if everyone everywhere hates the police? But on average, positive scores for the Ottawa police compared to the ones that we collected in Toronto earlier this year are lower by 12 to 15 points. So,
Really?
we are seeing a marked difference between Ottawa residents and their perceptions of their police force versus Toronto residents and their perceptions of theirs. Do you approve of the job the Ottawa Police Service is doing? 48% say no. That's half the city. Do you approve of the job that Eric Stubbs is doing as the Ottawa Police Chief? He's actually in negative territory, -2. Again, 40% don't really know. They have no opinion on what he's doing. But those who do dislike him more than like him. In Toronto, it's the opposite. Chief Deb-Q has a positive approval rating, not a negative one. In terms of, which statement comes closer to your view and the Ottawa police treat people fairly or not, most people say they do not. So, 38% say no and 36% say yes. These are not the numbers you want to be seeing if you're the Ottawa police. And, you keep going down a battery of questions in terms of responsiveness. People don't think it's there. Public trust and accountability is the top concern for 19% of people when it comes to this. But response times, and this is, where we get back into a little bit more of the mayoral race, 20% are identifying that as a top issue facing the Ottawa police. So that sort of tells me right off the bat that a lot of people feel like if they call, it might take too long for someone to show up and arrive. And then lastly, when we ask about more police presence and reform, people want to see both, but there's a lot of people who, 29%, a third of the city, who believe there needs to be more police reform and more accountability. So these are all, for the most part, not great numbers for the Ottawa Police Service. And, they're going to have to figure out how to rebuild public trust long term. It won't surprise people to learn that the worst numbers for the Ottawa Police are coming from downtown Ottawa, where the convoy took place. The number of people who say they have a great deal of trust in the police in downtown Ottawa is 3%. That is that is the margin of error. It may as well be zero as far as I'm concerned. So, really stark differences in trust in police depending on where in the city you live.
What really hits me with this is your comparison to Toronto police services, because you would think that Ottawa and Toronto would be very similar in their viewpoints of the police. So that's a stark difference.
And just for some additional context, the polling in Toronto took place after an incident called Project South took part in Toronto, in which effectively the Toronto police discovered that a lot of its own officers were corrupt and decided to press charges against them. That was the original reason this package ran in the Toronto Star. And so, as a fun thought experiment, I think it's interesting to see how Ottawa residents are reacting as well. And even though the Toronto numbers came after this pretty negative barrage of stories about police misconduct, the numbers are still significantly lower here in Ottawa. So, additional context for people to chew on.
It's in bringing it back to the mayoral race. Do you see this having a big impact positively or negatively for any one of the candidates?
I think it really depends if they are able to put forward an anti-crime agenda that is credible. It's clear from these numbers that there is appetite for police reform, for more police accountability. But it's also clear from these numbers that there's, a subset of Ottawa voters who are much more concerned about more investment in police because they don't believe someone's going to show up on time if they call. So I think it's dangerous territory. I think general crime messaging, will always play very strongly depending on which side of the political spectrum you're on, definitely more on the right than the left. But in terms of more specific things, we would need to see more research to see if those would be campaign negatives or potentially actually campaign liabilities. If people think that your version of reform means less officers on the streets and that no one is going to come in time when they have an emergency.
Yeah, it's certainly going to create a conundrum for many of the different campaigns, right? Like I know it's not as basic as right and left, but if you're a campaign, traditionally right of center campaigns are very pro-police in this country and in this province. Doug Ford is one that you see all the time stumping for the police. But with these numbers and as close as the race is, I could see it being a very difficult calculation.
Yeah, sometimes the math is easy. Do we want housing to be more affordable? Yes. Okay, so you can campaign on that. But what does it actually mean to make housing more affordable? And then you get into a whole subset of issues in terms of development charges and all sorts of things. For the most part, if you tell people we're going to make housing more affordable and the way we're going to do it is we're going to cut development fees, sounds pretty straightforward. But for some people, they don't like the idea of developers paying less, right? There is this perception in their head that developers are making off like bandits. All you're going to do is increase their profits. There's an education component where you have to explain the cost of the material materials has increased. There's a certain amount of capital involved. There's risk. There's cost overruns. We need to do this in order for them to build the housing at all. But, without that context, without that education, there are some people who very reflexively are against cutting development fees. So, the same goes for all these police reforms and different things you can put in the window is, are they going to play because people instinctively understand what you want to do and agree? Or does it require more education? And things that require more education aren't necessarily bad. They just take longer to explain. And so you have to figure out how that fits within your campaign plan.
The development fees point is a great point, David. I was actually surprised, and maybe I missed it. I know I was paying attention a few months ago when the city of Barrie announced their a reduction to development fees, but they had language that specifically connotated that reduction had to pass on to the end consumer, therefore, i.e., and particularly around a certain set of housing, right? So that $600,000 house was going to be 540, not the developer got to keep that piece in the middle. I didn't see that language in the announcements here in Ottawa, and I think that certainly adds to some political risk, not going down that road. Because it doesn't mean housing, like we've not seen a reduction in housing prices.
No, and then listen, I think it was very smart for the mayor and council in Barrie to do that. And time will tell to see how those costs and savings are passed on. But that's what people want to understand, right? Is what does this mean to me? Or what does this mean for our community? Handing out bags of cash for no reason does not play well. And we saw in last month a real skepticism about how City Hall is spending, right? So again, housing affordability, taking action, amazing. But the individual components you might have to take, you need to explain some of those, or it's actually going to end up being a negative.
Yeah. Well, David, it is great having you on. I am very much looking forward to your research next month and talking about how the race continues to evolve here in Ottawa. Thank you for doing this. I think this is a great public service to the people of Ottawa, and I think it's very interesting information. I know that when we were a day late posting your story, like I started getting text messages all over the place. So you're definitely getting eyeballs. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for having me and also for working with us, because this is a joint project and it's been great to work with the iPolitics and Ottawa Compass team every month.
It's spectacular. Look forward to seeing you next, David. Thank you.
All right. Until then, take care.